Hi, I'm Jerica Hucke. I'm the Draper at the Joffrey Ballet. And today I want to teach you how to choose and work with the best fabrics for your cosplay. Here is a list of the tools and materials that you will need to get the most out of this tutorial.
Rulers, pattern weights, rotary cutter, scissors, fabric marking options, pins and pincushion, thread, tracing wheel, and tracing paper.
Here is a list of resources from the library to extend your learning past this video.
Sew Any Fabric by Claire B. Schaefer, Fabric by Suzanne Trocmé, and Fabric Dyeing for Beginners by Vimala McClure.
Let's get started.
If you watched my first Radical Fit tutorial, How to Read a Commercial Pattern, then you know that I'm creating a Tisiphone cosplay from the game Hades by Supergiant Games. I've pulled this single image from her cutscenes and this turnaround from the artist who rendered the Tisiphone you battle in-game to use as reference materials as I build her out. Now that we have a pattern and know how to use it, it's time to choose our fabrics. Here are the 3 most important elements to keep in mind when picking out fabrics. Fiber content. Fabric can be made of almost anything, but we split them into 2 groups: natural, cotton, linen, silk, rayon, and synthetic, polyester, spandex, nylon. Fabrics made of natural fibers are easier to dye and can take higher heat when pressing or ironing. Fabrics made of synthetic materials are easier to paint but have a much lower melt point. Woven versus knit. There are 2 basic types of fabrics: fabrics that are made by weaving and fabrics that are made by knitting. Woven fabrics usually have little to no stretch and are best suited for structured garments, such as jeans and suits. Knits are almost always stretchy in at least 2 directions and are best suited for things like activewear and swimwear. Color. I know when building a cosplay, color might be the first thing that comes to mind when it's time to choose fabric, but color is the absolute last bit of criteria to consider because color is the easiest element to change. You can't change the weave of a fabric, but you can always dye or paint it if it isn't exactly right. Let's start by choosing a fabric for the kitan. If you look closely, you can see that it kind of crinkles up around the hips here, and it falls down the shoulder and is gathered at the waist. That tells me we need something with stiffness and shine, but not too much of either. I found this polyester blend in our stash at work. It is a synthetic fiber, which I will need to remember when I'm ironing so I don't melt it. And it is pretty lightweight and there's quite a bit of it, so I think I can get the skirt and shoulder drape out of what I have here. It also has a great texture and a clear grain line, which will be very useful when I'm laying out my pattern. And it crunches up nicely and holds the shape. Next up is this gray tone we see in a couple of places. It's here in the bodice and as a detail in the skirt hem, and if we look closely at the turnaround, we can see that it's also hiding back here in the calf section of the leggings. This is the most important part, even though it is the least visible. I'd like to use the same fabric for all 3 parts, but I need to make sure that it will play nicely. I found this gray spandex knit that I think will work. You can see here that it stretches side to side and up and down. This means it is a 4-way stretch and will work well for a legging. It does pose a problem for a structured bodice and skirt hem, but I have a technique that will solve that when it's time to sew. For the main part of the leggings, this is a thick 4-way stretch knit that I found in our stash, and I knew it would be a great option for the leggings. It is a cotton blend, so it's a little more matte than other spandex, and it feels soft for long days of wear. The only problem with this one was the color. This fabric was white when I found it, and after digging forever in our green scraps, I realized I wasn't going to find what I wanted and I would have to dye this piece. I think it came out pretty close to the other green we're working with. Now we need something for the accent X's on her leggings. These renderings make it look sort of purpley black and very shiny, so I went with this purple foiled wet look spandex. It's thin, very shiny, and highly reflective like the drawing. This is also a 4-way stretch, so I know it will work on top of the legging fabric we've already chosen. You can also see that this has a dramatic difference between right and wrong sides. We've got one more fabric to pick out. Earlier I mentioned a technique to solve my stretchy fabric problem, and this is it: flatlining. When you need a fabric to do something it doesn't want to do, say getting a soft stretch knit to behave like a structured bodice, you can flatline it. I found this very stiff woven fabric in a similar color, and layering these two fabrics together should give me the look I want on the outside and the structure I need on the inside. Now that we have all our fabrics in hand, it's time to cut. When you are laying out your fabric for cutting, it is very important to make sure that the grain line arrow on your pattern piece is running parallel to your selvage. This is the fabric's grain line. If your pattern piece is off grain and you cut it anyway, your garment, when sewn, will want to twist, and nobody wants twisty seams. Once you've found your grain line, you can lay out your pattern, weigh it down with pattern weights, and cut, or whatever works for the space you have. I used to pin my patterns through the fabric and into an old yoga mat on my kitchen table when I was working on costumes in my apartment in college. To mark this fabric, I used my friction pen to trace around the outer edge, as well as all triangles on edges and the darts. I need to mark my stitch line. Since commercial patterns all come with 5/8 inch seam allowance, I'm using my ruler to mark that distance in from my outer line. For cutting, I use my Ginger featherweight fabric scissors. This fabric is pretty thin, so I've doubled it over in order to cut the two back pieces at once. This pattern also requires that the front be cut on the fold, so I have it folded over for that as well, and there's just enough room to squeeze that third skirt piece on. Since we were only able to mark the top side while the pattern was laying on it, we need to mark the bottom. The easiest way to do this is with tracing paper and a tracing wheel. Lay your tracing paper down flat. I have mine taped to a piece of poster board. Then lay your pattern pieces on top of the tracing paper with the unmarked side down. Putting gentle pressure on your tracing wheel, run it along all the lines you just marked with your pen. Make sure you get all darts and seam alignment triangles. I've done this same process with all the bodice pieces, but I used a rotary cutter to get a nice clean line on the stretch and chalk to mark it because my pen wouldn't show up on the dark gray fabric. I've also used the same process on the bodice flatlining. Once I have two sets of bodice pieces, one stretchy, one not, I can pin them together to prep for sewing. Once they're attached to each other, they can be sewn together like a regular woven fabric. Finally, find some thread that matches your project and let's get sewing. Because this is a woven, I'm going to use a straight stitch at about a 3. This is the stitch length. When sewing stretch to stretch at a seam, use a zigzag stitch. This allows the fabric some movement without breaking your thread. If you have an older machine like mine, you use this wheel to change your stitch width, which tells the needle how far to the left and right to go. The final step in any stitching project is pressing. Pressing, or ironing, your seams can mean the difference between something looking handmade or looking homemade. I'm using an industrial iron, but when you use your iron at home, make sure you have it set to the correct fiber content of the fabric you are pressing. And don't be afraid to use the steam feature. It's a really important tool for getting seams pressed flat and keeping them that way. When you press a straight stitch seam, press it open. When you press a zigzag stitch seam, press it cleanly to one side.
Thanks for joining me today. Make sure to follow @YOUmedia on Instagram and Twitter, and @Chicago Public Library on Instagram. And tag CPL Radical Fit, YOUmedia, and YOUmediaChicago when you post your creations. Feel free to follow me @JJ Costumes on Instagram. I can't wait to see what you make.